Hey, what's up, guys? So I thought I'd make a video talking about jazz records that I think are great that have guitar playing on it. And in terms of why I chose these are records that I've had for a long time, and they feature guitar players I think are very important in the history of jazz. Most of the innovators in the early days of jazz were horn players and piano players, and it really wasn't until kind of getting into the 70s when guitar started becoming more prominent as a as an instrument that was creating sort of innovative concepts and ways of playing in jazz. But still, guitar was an important part of the evolution of jazz, and to me, in my mind, and there's certainly other great jazz guitar players, but to me, in my mind, the three kind of pillars that kind of stick out on guitar: Charlie Christian, starting with Charlie Christian in the 30s and 40s, and then Wes in the 50s and 60s, and then Pat Metheny in the 70s, 80s, and then until today, actually. And then also in the 90s, Kurt Rosenwinkel started to emerge, and I think he's sort of the next important voice on guitar, jazz guitar. There's certainly others that have been important, like Django Reinhardt and Jim Hall. But yeah, so I'm going to start with I'm going to start from the 30s and 40s, and then work my way up till most recent times. And to me, in my mind, what sort of makes these jazz records, because some of them somebody could question, is that really a jazz record? But to me, it's this sort of criteria of musicians that have checked out the history of jazz, and so they have an understanding of the evolution of it, and have gotten their hands in there with it, and at some point could play earlier styles of jazz, or at least understand earlier styles of jazz. And then they also the spirit of jazz, which is to move things forward, to innovate, and I think that's a really important part of what makes jazz great. To me, it's lacking the spirit of jazz. Somebody that's living today, for instance, 2021, that's trying to play in the style of jazz guitar playing in the 60s. That's not really the spirit of jazz. So anyways, I'm going to start with Charlie Christian, the genius of the electric guitar. And I apologize for the glare, but try to work around that. And yeah, so this is 16 tracks of all, tracks that have Charlie Christian on them. And he's playing with he's playing with Benny Goodman on these tracks. So anyways, yeah, this is a fantastic record to check out for Charlie Christian, sort of a culmination of all these different tracks that he's on. So yeah, so then getting into the 50s, Barney Kessel was an important guitar player. This is the Pole Winners. It's a group he had, and they made a few, I think, at least three records together. And Ray Brown on bass, and Shelly Manne on drums. And yeah, Barney Kessel was a very important jazz guitar player that played with a bebop type lines, but then also some new ways of playing too. So yeah, and then Kenny Burrell with John Coltrane. This is also in the 50s, so we're still in the 50s. And yeah, Kenny Burrell, very tasty guitar player. Not a real technical type of guitar player, but just very musical. And so this is a good record to check out with Coltrane. Because Coltrane, to my knowledge anyways, didn't make that many records with guitar players. So this is a good one to check out. Now, Wes Montgomery did make at least one record in the 50s, maybe more, right? Yeah, more, he did make more. But these next three records by Wes are in the 60s, and I chose these ones because these are my favorite ones by him. And this one might be my favorite jazz record out of all records. But yeah, so the Incredible Jazz Guitar record it's pretty incredible. So yeah. I recommend that one. And then Boss Guitar. So that's a quartet record. This one's a trio record. I thought I'd kind of mix it up. This is an organ trio record. Very tasty. So Boss Guitar, very tasty record. And then a big band record that he did with Jimmy Smith called The Dynamic Duo. It's called that even though it's a larger ensemble. It's featuring these two guys. My guitar teacher at Berklee College of Music recommended, or one of my guitar teachers at Berklee recommended I get this, transcribe some of the solos on it, and I'm glad he recommended this record. It took a little while to get used to it, but it's pretty tasty. I mean, every track is great, so recommend that. All right, and then now we're already into the 70s, because to me Wes was the most important guitar player in the 60s. I mean, beyond 60s too, but talking about that decade there. And then, so yeah, this is 1970 on the nose, so this is Bitches Brew, and this has John McLaughlin on it. And definitely conceptually pushing things, sonically pushing things forward. That's what Miles was all about. And to me, like, Miles is a great example of a true innovator and a true jazz musician. Yeah, so good example of what I was talking about at the beginning of this video. Now, this isn't really, to me, like a good representation of jazz in the 70s. But, I mean, he just sort of developed his way of playing earlier than the 70s and then finally got a chance to record. And so anyways, this is just an incredible record that I strongly recommend getting if you don't already have it. Joe Pass Virtuoso. It's a solo guitar record. So this is a very, very impressive record, and one obviously that I recommend. And then later in the 70s, Pat Metheny's first record, Bright Side's Life, with Jaco Pastorius on bass and Bob Moses. Definitely an original sound and original tunes and original way of playing. And so yeah, Pat is again a great example of someone that I consider to be a true innovator and jazz musician. So and this is definitely one of my favorite records of all time. Yeah, so I recommend that. Then his first group record came out the next year called Watercolors, and you know, he really starts integrating a lot of rock grooves and modern type of sensibilities at this point. So yeah, this is a really good record. Well, all of his records are great, but this is one I would recommend. And then into the 80s, so I didn't pick, I only picked one record from the 80s. There's certainly more, because then once we got into the 80s, then you got people like John Scofield and Bill Frisell, and then this one by Mike Stern. But I didn't, you know, I have a couple jazz records from the 80s, but they didn't really pull me in, so I'm not recommending them, but they are great. You know, there's some, like I said, some records by Scofield and by Frisell. But yeah, so Mike Stern's Upside Downside's his first record. You know, it sounds like it's made in the 80s, but it's a killer record, and all original tunes. And Mike was a big influence around that time, because he was a jazz guitar player that was playing power chords, but then also playing bebop lines with a distorted tone. And so yeah, he had a big influence on a lot of guitar players because of his sort of more modern influences that he fused with jazz. And then yeah, so then we're into the 90s already. This one's I think just a really good, it really came to me like it really came together well for him on this one. So another Mike Stern record, It Is What It Is. Yeah, sonically it's great, and he's got all the great players on it. One of his main drummers, Dennis Chambers, is on this. Michael Brecker on tenor sax, and so anyways, really good record. And then this is one of my favorite records, another Pat Metheny record. It's called Imaginary Day, and long song forms and really intricate ensemble work. And Pat's playing, I think it's called the Picasso guitar. It's like a 42-string guitar. So talking about innovation, I mean, as far as I know, he's one of the first or he's like the first jazz guitar player to start playing a 42 string guitar. So yeah, very much in the spirit of jazz. So this is a great record, Imaginary Day. So I was talking about the 80s, how there was a lot of other really great players making records in the 80s. One of them is the group Tribal Tech with Scott Henderson on guitar. But this is my favorite Tribal Tech record, so I thought I would just recommend this one, even though it's we're already into the year 2000, called Rocket Science. And yeah, Scott Henderson's tones on this is killer, and the way he plays, and the group interaction and everything, really, really great. And then Kurt Rosenwinkel emerged. This is one of his earlier records called The Next Step. Killer record. Kurt's got a very identifiable sound and way of playing, and yeah, just a killer, more kind of modern jazz record. And then Allan Holdsworth's All Night Wrong. And, Allan Holdsworth talked about checking out Charlie Christian, learning some Charlie Christian solos. So, he went all the way back to the beginning there. And so he had an understanding of jazz from that point of view. But then also he checked out Coltrane a bunch, and he cites Coltrane as an influence. So to me, he has modern jazz type sensibilities and the lines, and then like modern classical influence with the harmonic stuff, and then he's got modern grooves happening, mostly rock grooves with intricate, polyrhythmic activity and odd time signatures and those kind of sensibilities. So very complex, but very original and killer at the highest possible level. So this is my favorite Allan Holdsworth record. It's a live record, All Night Wrong. And then another Kurt Rosenwinkel record called Deep Song. It's a deep record. It's got my favorite piano player on it, Brad Mehldau. And this group is killer on this record. Well, on any of the stuff they did together, they sound great. Yeah, really good record. Now this is where, I don't even think Wayne Krantz considers himself a jazz guitar player, or he did at one time and maybe he got away from that. But to me, this record is a great example of a modern jazz type group. Your basic Live 06. All the guys in the group have checked out jazz. I know Wayne studied jazz pretty heavily in his early days, and then developed his own way of playing and own concepts. And the way the group interacts on this record is very much, to me, in the spirit of jazz. They really interact with each other. It's really very much a group improvisational type of situation. So this is a killer live record. Yeah, this is actually my favorite Wayne Krantz record. And then Bill Frisell. I don't think this even has a title. This is my favorite Bill Frisell record. Bill is one of the important modern jazz guitar players. And this has Dave Holland on bass and Elvin Jones on drums. And it's to me, a really deep record. It's got a great vibe to it. So I recommend that. And then, conceptually, this isn't really pushing things, but Scofield's such an important jazz guitar player. I wanted to recommend at least one or two by him. This is a live record they did with Bill Stewart and Steve Swallow on bass. It's really a killer live record. They really stretch out on it, and they play their asses off on it. So wanted to recommend at least, like I said, one or two Scofield records. So there's that. And then... Actually, I forgot to mention this one in the 1990s. So this is a Chris Potter record. This also has Scofield on it. This is a great record by Chris Potter. If you don't know Chris Potter, he's my favorite living saxophone player. Unspoken is the name of the record. And then the last one, because this is like 2015. Yeah, I just like this record, and it's, they got a tune in 5, a tune in 3, a tune in 6, I think, and it's like different time signatures, some different grooves, some different sensibilities, beautiful melodies, and this is a group that they've had together for quite a while with Joe Lovano on sax, tenor, and then Larry Grenadier on bass, and Bill Stewart on drums. Bill Stewart is one of the most important jazz drummers alive today. So yeah, so there's, I'm not sure how many records that was, maybe like 20 or so. Records that I recommend. Again, there's plenty of other great jazz records, but these are definitely featuring really important guitar players in the history of jazz and currently. And yeah, to me, again, like the spirit has to be there for me to consider it to be, you know, what jazz is about, you know, as far as like pushing things forward. And then also having that understanding of the history of it, so that you have that connection to it, so you're not, you know, a metal group improvising and calling themselves jazz musicians. You know, you have to have those kind of deep roots, the deep understanding of jazz, I think, to even consider yourself a jazz musician. But yeah, so there's some records to maybe check out, maybe some of them, maybe all of them. They're definitely all great, I guarantee you that. And well worth your time to listen to. Sometimes, you know, with jazz, because it is so intricate and so complex, it can take a while to appreciate some of these records. So you might have to, if you're willing to, get an understanding of some of these records that maybe don't hit you right away. You might have to listen to them for a few times before it really starts to make sense to your ear. And to me, that's part of great art. You know, great art. I think a lot of times isn't really meant to be understood right away, because it has so many great detail in it. So anyways, I'll leave it there. Hope you guys found that helpful in some way, and I'll touch you guys in a future video. All right, thanks.